And welcome back to Cafe Oleh. My name is Jay, and here at Cafe Oleh, we go over the everyday Hebrew you need here in Israel to succeed. Whether that's reading and paying your bills, going grocery shopping and reading nutritional labels, keeping up with the news, striking up a conversation on all sorts of topics from flirting and dating to interviewing for a job, complaining, all the everyday things you do with your language, your native language in your country of origin, but here in Hebrew, here in Israel in modern Hebrew. As always, we want to hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover. Please be in touch with us by email. That's hebrew@nbn.org.il. You can always email us with any questions, requests, comments, concerns, whatever you may have. If you're joining us on Zoom, you can always write to us in the chat window here on the Zoom menu bar. You can also see all of our previous lessons up on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com, type in Cafe Oleh, you'll see a playlist with all of our previous lessons. You can watch at your leisure on demand, including getting the vocabulary spreadsheets for them as well. So you can always review a class if you miss one or you want to go back and review. They're there for your convenience. And also one last piece of housekeeping, at least for now, owing to our reality that we're in. If you are in a place here in Israel where the air raid siren goes off during our lesson, your safety is more important than keeping up with our classes. Please go seek adequate shelter for at least 10 minutes, depending on and your designated safe space in the country. And then please come back and join us. You can always come back. We'll be on YouTube, like I said, recorded. If I unfortunately have to step out, again, we'll just resume where we left off, and you'll have the recording in its entirety to watch later on. With that, let's get started today. It is just a few days before a popular holiday here in Israel, an important holiday with regards to Jewish history, and certainly what we're facing here in Israel, and frankly, Jews around the world right now. It's an even more needed holiday, which is Hanukkah. We've covered Hanukkah in the past, but I think it's always important to review it, just like with all holidays, to review them because there are differences in how we celebrate Jewish holidays here in Israel versus in diaspora communities. There are certain traditions that are either brand new to Israeli culture and society or that are brought together from other communities that we're not necessarily used to. So it's a good refresher, not just to get ready for the holiday, but also what to expect leading up to it and during it. If you have questions while I'm talking on this specific topic of Hanukkah, please write it in the Q&A. If you have any other questions regarding Hebrew, I'll try to get to them, but this is for the Q&A. Anything that's not related to this class, please write it in the chat. And if we have time at the end, I'm going to teach you a song because you know how much I like using music to get you further acquainted and educated with Israeli identity. And it's a specific Hanukkah song that you probably have heard before, but you didn't know was a Hanukkah song, which makes it even more, I think, interesting. But for now, we're going to start with the vocabulary for today. So let me pull that up. As always, Hebrew is going to be in the middle, transliteration on the right, English on the left. And we start with my favorite rant and rave this time of year. If you've joined us before for Hanukkah, for Cafe Oleh, you know this rant. It always needs to be said, especially a holiday that is all about defeating the forces that want to physically and culturally assimilate us into oblivion. It's important that we talk about pronunciation. Folks, this holiday is Hanukkah. I don't care how you transliterate it into Latin characters, because for native English speakers, we have multiple ways to do it. If you're a native Spanish speaker, you do it in a certain way, usually with the letter J or Jota in Spanish. If you're French, you might do it differently. There's only one spelling of this holiday. It's Hanukkah, as it's written here in row 3, and it's pronounced Hanukkah. I understand that for a lot of people learning Hebrew, that ch sound may be difficult for them to say. If that's your case, that's fine. Actually, there are two ways to pronounce the letter chet in modern Hebrew that are standardized. One is the one that we use all the time, the vast majority of Hebrew speakers, which is chet. The other one is het. The letter chet originally was pronounced as he. That was considered too difficult to pronounce by particularly older Ashkenazi immigrants to what was then emerging as into the Yishuv. And it became acceptable to say it like the letter chaf. That being said, and we have a whole lesson, by the way, on pronunciation. Look on YouTube when talking about the metamorphosis and the change of some letter pronunciations. I highly recommend watching it. It's really interesting about the letter chet. But in the meantime, if you can't say the letter chet, or the sound ch, at the very least, it's important that you get these vowels correct. It's Hanukka. It's a-u-a. I know there's a tendency among, especially fellow Americans, be they Jewish or not, to pronounce this holiday like Hanukkah. Folks, Hanukkah in modern Hebrew is breastfeeding. It is the act of breastfeeding. No less miraculous, no less important, but that is not the name of this holiday. In modern Hebrew, Hanukkah means breastfeeding, the act of breastfeeding. This holiday is called Hanukkah. Okay, and it's called Hanukkah for a very specific reason. We often are told it means dedication, and we're going to actually dive into this shoresh, the three letters that make up the name of this holiday, Chet, Nun, Kaf, in a second. But I just want to always reiterate this, especially a holiday that's all about countering assimilation. We need to pronounce our own holidays and their names correctly. It is Hanukkah. However you want to transliterate it is fine. If you can't say chet, that's fine. Hanukkah is perfectly all right, but it is not. It is not. And you know me well enough that I don't put my foot down very much in these classes. This holiday is not pronounced Hanukkah, unless you're trying to make a joke. Okay, so our letters, our shoresh of our holiday Hanukkah, Chet, Nun, Kaf, has to do with a lot of things that are related to Hanukkah and also to everyday things. Let's look at some of them. First off, the name of what we are going to light in a few days from now is called in modern Hebrew a Chanukiah. It is not a menorah. Menorah can be of various different branches, either 7 or 9. In the case of Hanukkah, it is 9 branches, and we specifically refer to it as a Chanukiah. You won't even see the word menorah when it comes to Hanukkah. You will sometimes, or it'll be called menorah, a menorah shel Hanukkah, or menorat Hanukkah. If you remember the other week's class about creating new words, and we talked about compound words, that's a way to do it. But you can simply just use the word Chanukiah. Chanukiah will refer to the menorah that we use on Hanukkah. So it will have total of spaces, 8 spaces plus the shamash that lights the other 8 candles. Okay. From the same root, by the way, we get some other words. First off, the one that you probably are most familiar with, which is a Chanukkat Bait. Chanukkat Bait, a housewarming party. Whether you've bought a house, you've moved to a new house, you're renting an apartment, you've moved to a new apartment, regardless, it's a great occasion to have people over and have a Chanukkat Bait. I see that the vowels on it are wrong. There we go, Chanukkat Bait. Okay, it's a great thing to do. And like I said, that word Hanukkah usually has to do with housewarming, like you hear in this case, or dedication. So we also use this term when we're opening a new building, for example. You'll hear this a lot. Chanukkat binyan, Chanukkat misrad hadash. All those terms are used in the same way, referring also back to the story behind this holiday as well, in rededicating the Beit HaMikdash, the temple in Jerusalem, after it was defiled, as one part of the story of Hanukkah. But we use this same root related to other words in everyday life. For example, education. Education is chinuch in modern Hebrew. Okay, that's so, for example, the Ministry of Education, Misrad HaChinuch. And chinuchi, we talked again 2 weeks ago about creating new words by simply adding a yud at the end of a noun to create an adjective. So from chinuch, education, we get the word educational, chinuchi. Okay. If I wanted to conjugate that, chinuchi, chinuchit, chinuchim, chinuchiot. Okay. Same with that. And because Hebrew often works this way, where we use the same root to create a lot of similarly related words. So it's all very concise, compact, conservative, and easy to learn, because once you learn the shoresh, you recognize it again and again, and therefore the relationship between words, as well as how words are created. For example, chanich. Chanich is a pupil or a participant. You'll hear this term used anything from as it says, a pupil or participant. You'll hear this also used in Tnuot Noar, in youth movements here in Israel, referring to participants, not the madrich, not the counselor, but the participants in that specific Tnuah, in that youth movement. So chanich, chanicha, chanichim, chanichot. Okay, pupil or participant. And then finally, with the same root, we talked about education and educational. We talked about the pupil, and now the person who actually brings the education, the mechanech. Mechanech is a term you're going to hear a lot if whether you have children or grandchildren, or you're just keeping up with the educational system here in Israel. There are teachers, morim, and there's also educators, just as there's a difference in other languages and cultures and societies. I'm not going to get into the differences now, but you'll often hear about a mechanech. Mechanech is a male educator. Mechanechet, female, mechanchim, mechanchot. Okay, so all these words have the same root as the name of our holiday, Hanukkah, Chet, Nun, Kaf. Okay, before we get into the specifics of the holiday, we also want to talk about how we talk about this holiday. The other name for this holiday that you're going to see a lot in Israel is Chag Urim or Chag HaUrim. Urim, lights. So Chag HaUrim, the festival of lights. You've probably heard it referred to this in English. We use the same thing in Hebrew. This is a common way that you'll see signage referring to Hanukkah. You'll see Hanukkah Sameach or Chag Hanukkah Sameach, but you'll also see Chag Urim Sameach or Chag HaUrim Sameach. For example, on buses, on their excuse me, their LCD signs at the front of the bus, it'll often be lit up during the holiday, Chag Urim Sameach. You'll see this in advertisements, on TV, online, printed. Chag Urim Sameach is another way simply to say Happy Hanukkah. Either one you'll see, but just know that's referring to the same holiday. Okay. When we get to a Chanukiah here in Israel, it's important to know, for those of us who observe the holiday and celebrate it, you can get a regular Chanukiah, right? And I'm gonna talk about that in the middle. Or you can get what I have in my house, which is called a Beit Chanukiah, or it's also known as an aquarium. Aquarium or Beit Chanukiah. Aquarium obviously is not Hebrew. Both you can see how awkward it is to pronounce it, let alone spell it. Aquarium is simply the cognate of aquarium. Why is it an aquarium? I'm going to show you right now. If you've never seen this before, you will certainly see it in Judaica stores now. Also, you'll see it in a lot of towns like Jerusalem, and in other observant communities, you'll often see this. In order to ensure that the mitzvah of what we call in Aramaic, Pilsume de Nisa, the act of publicizing the miracle of the lights, is shown. You will often see people have this in their window. Oh, disappeared on me. There it is. Is this guy. It's known either as an aquarium, as you see here, or as a Beit Chanukiah, or a Chanukiat aquarium, as it's called here. Okay, all of these are the same thing, which is a glass enclosed Chanukiah. See all these these transparent sides are actually glass. The dome pulls off, as well as at least one of the sides, the longer sides of the glass, so you can get access to the candles and light them, and then put this on top. This allows you to keep your Hanukkiah outside, and it prevents, unless there's a real storm, and there is going to be a storm during this year's Hanukkah, this prevents any significant gusts of wind, or more rather light gusts of wind, from knocking it out. Okay. So it's a really nice way to fulfill the mitzvah of Pilsumei Denisa, making sure that people can see the lights of your Hanukkiah. But this is obviously one model. It's usually more expensive, as you see the price here. If this is out of your budget, don't worry about it, but you will see this. You'll also hear about a lot of tours of neighborhoods during Hanukkah, especially in Jerusalem. And the point is to see people's homes, and they put these outside their doors and entrances to their homes in order to, again, further celebrate the holiday. So this is, when you hear the term aquarium, when it comes to Hanukkah, we haven't lost our minds entirely. This is what it's referring to. Okay. Getting back to our list. So that's a Beit Hanukkiah or an aquarium. It's what I have. Many of you probably on this call also have it, or have seen it before. You also probably have all your own type of Hanukkiah. No matter what it's made out of, it could be very ornate, it could be very simple, it could be a row, it could be shaped in the traditional way. It could be the one that Chabad uses, which is a more angular level, all sorts of very creative ones, and ones that you're also going to see on the move, or mobile ones. Mobile meaning that they're very light and easy to move around is what we call Chanukiat Pach. Pach or Pachit comes from the word can. Think of it like aluminum. These are those very thin, flimsy, though made out of aluminum, easily movable, easily cleanable, lightweight Chanukiot that you'll see, and usually sold alongside candles in every store. By the way, if you haven't bought candles yet, don't worry. We'll get to that in just a second. There's still plenty in the market. I just bought mine yesterday or today, I forget at this point, but there were still plenty available. But a Chanukiat Pach is the one that's a very lightweight metal. I remember getting this in Sunday school back in the US in the 1990s, in addition to all the ones we had at home. You'll see these as well throughout Israel. Candle, ner or nerot. Even though the plural of ner is nerot, it is a masculine word. Okay, so ner is one candle, nerot are multiple candles, but this is a masculine word. So ner katan, a small candle, nerot ktanim. Okay, despite the ending, it is masculine. We have a whole class on words like this on YouTube. Highly recommend that class. The part that's most important for a candle to work is called a ptila. Ptila is a wick. Okay, that could be made out of fabric, that could be made out of wax-covered fabric, whatever it may be. A ptila is a wick. Okay, and ptilot are wicks. And you're going to see, especially when you get to more ornate Chanukiot, like the Beit Hanukkiah, they aren't just the regular multicolored skinny candles. We get into one we're going to get to in just a second, but most candles that you're going to use for Hanukkah are made out of sha'ava. Sha'ava is wax. That could be beeswax, sha'avat dvorim. That could be all sorts of other means of sha'avat soya, soy wax. All sorts of different ways to use wax, but sha'ava is wax. That's also, by the way, wax that we use throughout the year, whether that's as a grooming product or as a sealant on things or whatever it may be. Wax in Hebrew, sha'ava. Okay. Finally, this is unique to the aquarium type Hanukkiah, but you'll also see this in large Hanukkiot, is what we call kosiot shemen zait. It's a tradition to use actual olive oil as the base of your candle instead of sha'ava, instead of wax, because that's the history of the holiday. And you will see people have very beautiful, very expensive, very fragile oil lamps for each branch of their Hanukkiah to light and refill. It is very messy. And you will see containers of olive oil specifically for this, not using extra virgin olive oil, but oil specifically for Hanukkiot. You will also see what it's called here, kosiot shemen zait. These are individual, usually in plastic, pre-portioned olive oil holders for a Hanukkiah. You'll see these sold as a set. They look like it's like a flat set. It's usually rectangular and it's plastic. And inside are 44 of these individual kosiot, and they're called kosiot coming from the word kos, a cup, because they look like a cup. It's a cylinder. Inside has the ptila, the wick, and around it will be the oil. Now, the shemen zait in these candles, and it is shemen zait, will either be mutzak or nozli, as you see here. Mutzak means solid. Okay, so you'll see I just bought mine as well, and they are mutzak, so it's easier to handle. I don't have to worry about being clumsy or tripping, and then all the oil spills out or just enough to make it really gross. Instead, the oil inside is mutzak. It's solid, so it will burn. It will melt and burn accordingly, just like any other candle or shemen zait. It just comes in a solid form, so it's easier to handle. Highly recommend using that if you're going to use that. And nozli is obviously liquid. That's the opposite. That's what I was talking about with the filling in of the candles. You can find these kosiot shemen zait with shemen zait nozli. I recommend not using those. They are far more complicated to use. They usually have a top you have to take off, and you just have to be really careful not to spill because it just gets gross. There's also the issue of how long the candles need to burn. For those of you who are religiously observant, the motzak ones, the solid ones, you are good to go to fulfill the religious commandment there. And again, they're just easier to handle should you want to use those. And they're found everywhere. Everywhere sells candles, by the way. You don't need to go to a Judaica store, or as we call it here in Israel, Judaica, in order to get candles. They will sell, but so will your local grocery store, convenience store, supermarket, in addition to Hanukkiot. Okay, we went through all of that. Let's get to some important parts of this holiday, namely the food. The food is no less important here in Israel for Hanukkah as it is elsewhere in other communities, but the priority of the foods is going to be different. And this is going to, as an Oleh who's been here more than 17 years, I can guarantee there are going to be a handful of Olim on this call who are going to be upset hearing this. And I've seen it on a regular basis, whether it's people's first time in Israel for Hanukkah or not, that they are going to be hard in finding certain foods, one of which we're about to talk about. First off, we're going to talk about a general category called levivot. Levivot are any kind of fritter. That is anything that is fried, a thin batter that is fried on a pan. We'll get to the words for fried in a little bit. But levivot can be made out of anything. There are Jewish communities whose tradition it is to fry levivot gvina, levivot that have gvina or cheese in them. And that has to do with one of the stories with regards to a woman named Yehudit who vanquished one of the generals out to annihilate us by applying him with wine and various cheese products. He subsequently fell asleep. She decapitated him. It made all his troops run away out of fear. Okay, so levivot can be of all sorts of different foodstuffs. It can be cheese, like I said, levivot gvina. It can be made from any kind of fruit or vegetable. You'll see these throughout the year, various different kinds. And many Jewish communities, by the way, have tradition of eating levivot throughout the year. For example, it's a very common thing to eat levivot made out of krisha or leeks for Rosh Hashanah among many Sfaradim and Mizrahim. You'll also hear this for Pesach, eating levivot. It's a very common Jewish food because you're using scraps. You don't need to use big choice cuts of anything. It's small bits that are bound together with flour and egg and then fried. But the one you're probably all familiar with, in Hebrew, we call levivot tapuche adama. Potato fritters, or many of you are used to the term latkes. Now, again, just like Hanukkah, you cannot get away with the vowel in modern Hebrew. Does not exist in modern Hebrew the way it exists in English and other languages. And that's why you're going to see and hear levivot tapuche adama pronounced in Yiddish in Israel as latkes. Okay, I didn't grow up saying it like that. Most people I know don't pronounce it like that, but you do hear people in Israel, and probably some of you did grow up saying latkes, because that's closer to the Yiddish, and that's how we say it in Israel as well, latkes. And you're going to see it spelled almost like it is in Yiddish, and that ayin between the second to last and last letters emphasizes that this word is latkes and not our next word, which is latex or latex, or sometimes it's spelled with two yods there. Okay, you're obviously not going to be eating latex for Hanukkah. You're going to be eating latkes if that's what you're interested in, and you will see instant latkes mixes in the stores, just like you will in diaspora communities, but they are pronounced latkes. In the same way, other foods that we're used to as being quote unquote Jewish are either hard to find here or not as commonly eaten and only eaten on the holidays. Another great one is blinches. In Israel, we say blinches or blinchim, blinchesim, instead of blintzes, blinches. Okay, latkes, same thing. Just make sure that it's at the end of the word. However you choose to celebrate, whether you eat these or don't eat these, whether you make them at home, don't make them at home, there's always the ongoing debate what you put on top of them. I hope many of you are of team kvutzat shamenet chamutza, meaning you are of the sour cream type people. Shamenet chamutza is how we say sour cream. Shamenet is cream, chamutza, sour. We certainly have no lack of sour cream in this country. Sometimes it's simply called shamenet, but you will see it's solid, but it is called in small letters on the side, shamenet chamutza. There's also the other team. I'm happy you put both of these together. That's actually my preferred way, which is resek tapuchim. Okay, resek tapuchim is applesauce. It is not a literal translation of applesauce into Hebrew because rotev, the word that we use for sauce or dressing in Hebrew, usually implies that something is cooked. Whereas applesauce is typically not cooked. It's a resek. Lerasek something is to just pound it into a paste, or crush it is a better way to describe lerasek, is to crush something. So resek tapuchim is literally crushed apples. Now the consistency of resek tapuchim will be like the applesauce you know from abroad. It is also even harder to find than pre-made latkes. Sour cream is very easy to find. Resek tapuchim is going to be harder to find. You're sometimes going to need to look in the side aisles, as it will be non-perishable. Sometimes it'll be in small individual packs because it's not a common food here in Israel as much, at least until this time of year. A couple things with the word resek tapuchim. This is the time of year also to recognize that we use the word tapuach quite a lot in modern Hebrew. This word appears in biblical literature, in the Tanakh and in the Talmud. Tapuach is used to describe three different fruits and two different fruits and a vegetable. First off, apple, row 29. tapuach. You can simply say tapuach, or if you want to be specific, tapuach etz, meaning it grows on an etz, a tree. And you will see it oftentimes, not always. If it's referred to as tapuach etz, it'll also be abbreviated like this. Okay. But tapuach, just on its own, the word tapuach means an apple in modern Hebrew, as opposed to a tapuach adama. Tapuach adama is the modern Hebrew way to say the word potato. Obviously, the Middle East is not the origin of potatoes. Potatoes have only been used by Jews since bringing back from the Americas in the 15th and 16th centuries. Jews were some of the first people in Europe and the Mediterranean to adopt eating potatoes. They were thought of as being either poisonous or only good for animal fodder for many years. And since then, because they were cheap and plentiful, Jews, especially from very poor communities, really took to potatoes hard, which is why we love our potatoes in Israel, regardless of what Edah or ethnic community you come from. Tapuach adama is the same way that we say it in French and in other languages, apple of the earth. Tapuach, apple, adama, earth. You will also see it abbreviated. This one much more commonly you'll see abbreviated like this. Okay, with an aleph at the end. You'll see that on menus. You'll see that in list of ingredients, because writing out tapuach adama, as we talked about before, when you can abbreviate and when you can be more conservative in the number of letters and syllables you use in Hebrew, the better. And then finally, the one when we talked about creating new words the other week, I didn't include, or maybe I forget if I did, but I always like including this one because this one is a outlier. We are one of the few languages in the world, speakers of the languages in the world, that calls that orange-colored fruit, citrus, neither from its South Asian origin, like orange, naranja, laranja, and all those others, or portugal, based on the fact that the Portuguese were some of the first traders of the fruit into Europe and the Mediterranean. So we call it tapuz. If you wondered why tapuz sounds so similar to tapuach, it's because tapuz is actually an abbreviation for tapuach zahav, a golden apple. Beautiful, poetic sounding, but tapuz comes from tapuach zahav. The two apostrophes that indicate a abbreviation or an acronym have simply been dropped in everyday standard spelling in Hebrew. But you will see older books and more specific and concise dictionaries of Hebrew still spell it like this, with two apostrophes between the second to last and last letters, called gilshaim. But we just know it as tapuz. But know that tapuz is a unique word to Hebrew that is created from the word apple. Apples and oranges, we like to show that they're related. But we're going to leave levivot and latkes because we need to get to the more important food for this holiday. And it's important for so many reasons, not just because we love it, but it has to do a lot with Israeli history, which is sufganiyot. Sufganiyot are the most popular food to be eaten during Hanukkah. Sufganiyot refer to filled donuts. You will see donuts, and they're called donuts, sold throughout the year, including on Hanukkah. That is what you think of as a donut from elsewhere in the world. It is a round, flat, fried dough with a hole in the middle. That in Hebrew is called a donut or donuts. Sufganiyot are very specific in being a fried ball of yeasted dough with a filling or a topping, but they definitely will always have a filling. From the same root, and sufganiyot can be attested to in terms of eating fried foods in general, but specifically fried dough in many Jewish communities for thousands of years. And it comes from the same root in Hebrew as the word for sponge, sfog, right? And it doesn't have to do with the oil seeping into the dough, because if you make proper sufganiyot, the inside will not be oily. The outside maybe if it wasn't allowed to drain correctly, but the inside should absolutely not be, but rather think of when you open up a sufganiyot and it looks like a sponge inside because of all that yeasted dough that's been allowed to cook and all those air pockets, right? That's where the connection of the two words comes from. Sfog is a sponge. Lisfog is to squeeze in that sense of using a sponge. And one specific type of donut that comes from the Moroccan Jewish community is called sfinge. You've probably heard this before, sfinge. It uses the exact same root of sufganiyot and sfog. There are also other types of fried dough that are eaten by Jewish communities and are found here in Israel. We're going to get back to sufganiyot in a second. One of them is called zalabia. Same idea where you're dropping bits of fried dough into boiling oil. It not only looks sfog inside, but it often crisps up on the outside. And another one that's found among Sephardi communities is buñuelos, also pronounced in Hebrew and spelled as burmuelos. These are eaten not just on Hanukkah, but also on Purim and at other times of the year. We have a lot of traditions of it, and also Ashkenazi communities also have this. The sufganiyot that we eat in modern Israel is actually based off an Eastern European donut. I forget how to pronounce it correctly in Polish, but it sounds like paczki. You've probably heard that before. That's the equivalent of this big puffed up ball of dough with jam in it. I know paczki sounds like something else to some other people who speak Yiddish here, but that's the equivalent in Polish, not Yiddish, of the word. Why is this such a big deal in Israel? Why do we eat so many sufganiyot? The answer has to do with history. Sufganiyot really took off in the 1920s in Israel when the biggest economy here and the biggest industry in Israel was agriculture. Come winter, as you see, as it's getting to be winter now, and it's colder and darker and more importantly, wetter outside, the harvest time is over. There are very few crops that you're going to be harvesting en masse this time of year, if at all. And they needed a way to employ the everyday masses on a regular basis to create industry and to create economy in a society that was very poor, that didn't have trading partners because it wasn't even a country yet, the 1920s. And so sufganiyot came along because they could be industrialized. They could be made on a mass scale using the conveyor belt, right? That invention that was only about 10, 20 years old by that point, but it could be used to mass produce food. And the idea was that you can make that much easier than a latke, right? Because levivot, first off, to make a leviva is a much more fragile thing. Any of us who've made them at home, hopefully you don't make really thick ones. If you do, I will happily not take you up on an offer at home. I grew up in having the best ones possible. I'm sure my mom is on this call, so she'll attest to that as well, because she makes them, but they're nice and thin and crispy, therefore. That's a very hard thing to make on an industrial level, right? And this is 1920s. We don't have big freezers to make them and save them and store them, right? It is much harder to make those. And also, there wasn't the tradition to make levivot tapuchei adama from Sfaradim and Mizrahim. That's not how they celebrate the holiday. But everyone knew what a fried ball of dough with something inside was, whether they were Ashkenazi or Sfaradi. And so the compromise was, number one, the format of the sufganiyot would be Eastern European, but this would be something that all communities could get around, and it could be industrialized. You can make huge amounts of these, and they were shelf stable. Anyone who's gone to a supermarket in Israel from the last few weeks and through this holiday know how those sufganiyot stay there. They may not be the most edible a few days in, but the point is they can stay on the shelf until they're sold, as opposed to need to be eaten hot and at the moment like levivot. Okay, so sufganiyot actually helped employ Jews during the mandate period, during the winter months. And so that's how it caught on to being such a big deal and such a big to-do here in Israel about who makes the best, sufganiyot, what's the best filling. You're seeing this year, by the way, the trend, regardless of where you are in the country, regardless which ones you eat, because of the war, you're seeing people focusing on the classic flavors. There are people who are doing more inventive things, but you're seeing this big return to the classic flavors, and they're even billing them as hatamim haklasim, the classic flavors, which are usually ribat tut, strawberry jam, or as I simply call it, ribat adom, riba aduma. It's just red flavored jelly inside. We all know that one, that bright red color. But other popular flavors lately are ribat chalav, dulce de leche, milk caramel, chocolate, all sorts of interesting ones. But sufganiyot, that's why they're so popular in Israel. It helped keep us profitable and employed during the winter months in a way that levivot and latkes simply couldn't. Okay, speaking of levivot and sufganiyot, should you want to make these at home, you're going to need to litagen. Litagen is to fry. There's all sorts of stories about where this root comes from. I think the consensus is it's from ancient Greek. It's not that fried foods are foreign to Jewish communities, but to require that amount of oil was only about 2,500 years old for Jewish communities. So litagen is to fry. Mitugan is something that is fried, but when you go to a restaurant or you go to a place that has prepared foods, especially for Shabbat, and it has a counter or it says on the sign how much mituganim cost, often it'll say something like mituganim shishim shekel lekilo. What does that mean? It means that they have a whole array of fried foods. These are things usually covered in some sort of crust or coating and fried. There are all sorts of different ones traditional to Jewish communities, like pastelim, which are usually meat or potato filled, made from a very thin dough, almost like egg roll dough. My personal favorite, which is kube, also known as kibbe, which is bulgur wheat crust that is filled with a minced beef, almonds or pine nuts, and some spices. There are all sorts of other fried things that are often sold as mituganim, and it's just a catch-all term for fried foods. And you know, being an American in origin, I always try to go for the fried food. So mituganim, always a good thing, especially this time of year. When it comes to sufganiyot, however, it's always important to know all the different permutations that people make, but also buy and sell. So for example, what kind of tzipui does it have? Tzipui is a coating. Is it tzipui ragil? Is it tzipui shel sukar? Is it a sugar coating? Is it a glaze? Whatever it may be on the outside. And also, maha milui. Milui is the filling, coming from the same root, by the way, as limalet, to fill. So milui is what kind of filling is inside. And usually they're one of two types. Riba, as I said just before, which can mean both jam and jelly. In Hebrew, we don't make a distinction as opposed to English. Jam and jelly are both riba. Or creme. Creme is simply cream, but cream as in something that's thicker. It's not C-R-E-A-M, as you see here, C-R-E-M-E. Okay. All these terms are obviously important, not just picking out sufganiyot and what you're going to be eating. And if ever there was a time for comfort eating, especially around fried foods, this is the moment for all of us. Okay. And then finally, two more words before I stop and answer some questions. Dreidel. Dreidel is a Yiddish term. You will, excuse me, you will be hard to hear it, find it being spoken as a dreidel in mainstream Israeli society. Instead, it's called a sivivon. If you don't know what a dreidel means in Yiddish, you can certainly figure out what sivivon means in Hebrew. It comes from the same root as sovev, or lesovev, to turn something around, or lehistovev, to turn around, right? Or a sivuv, a walk around or turn around, right? So sevivon is something that it turns around, right? That's the idea of it, right? You twist it, okay? So, and it twists, it spins around. That's what we call it in modern Hebrew. Um, and finally, gelt, another Yiddish word, just like latkes, just like dreidel. We're all used to using these terms. Many of us, not all of us on this call, many of us are used to them. You're just not going to hear them as mainstream here in Israel as you would in your respective Jewish communities of origin. Okay, instead, if you are looking for those golden coins that hopefully haven't turned white inside because they're not the greatest milk chocolate, you're going to look for either called Dmei Hanukka or Matbaot Chocolate. Dmei Hanukka. Dmei, we've talked about this word before, Dmei. Dmei is actually Aramaic, and you can think of it as both money, but also like a fee. So for example, a Dmei Knisa is an entrance fee. If you have to go to, if you're going to a party or to, for example, a lot of places nowadays have fancier restaurants or restaurants that think they're fancy will have a dmei hazmana. You have to put down basically an X amount of money that you get back once you confirm your reservation, excuse me, by actually showing up. Dmei means fee or money or cost. And we use it like a compound word. So dmei Hanukka, literally Hanukkah money. Okay, the other term you're going to see it on the label or referred to is matbeot chocolate. Matbeot are coins. Matbea is one coin. It's also the word in general for currency, but matbeot are coins. Chocolate speaks for itself. Okay, so those are words, major words for Hanukkah. We're running out of time because I want to be sure to answer your questions. And by the way, I see a lot of conversation in the chat, which is wonderful. I'm only going to be looking at the Q&A. So this is your chance. If you wrote something in the chat that you wanted me to answer now, Q&A is your friend. But what I will do as a bonus is share that. Actually, you know what? We have a minute. I'm going to share with you this song because it's a really, I think, an important song. So let me pull it up first. If I can find it on my computer. There we go. Okay. There are a lot of great resources out there for sound. There are a lot of great websites out there for hearing Israeli music and getting the story before them. One of these great ones, as you see here, is called Zemer Reshet. I'll send you this link. Don't worry about it. And it gives you all sorts of historical songs in Hebrew and the different versions of them here. This specific song, right, is a, and this is actually early Hebrew music, as it says here. This song you're probably very familiar with. The song is called Anu Nosim Lapidim. We are carrying torches. This song was written in the 1920s. Again, a very formidable time in Israeli, what would become Israeli culture, in creating an Israeli culture and identity. And this song was born out of, it was written by an educator. His name was Aharon Zeev, and the music put to it was created by one of the most important Israeli songwriters of all time. His name is Mordechai Zeira. You can click on this link. It'll show you all the different songs he helped write the music to. And this song came out of a ideological battle at the time between Maccabi and Poalim. Anyone who's been in Israel long enough, you know that almost every major sports team in Israel is either Hapoel or Maccabi, right? Here in Tel Aviv, where I live, we have Hapoel Tel Aviv and Maccabi Tel Aviv. Those are born out of ideological differences. Hapoel, the worker, comes out of the socialist Zionist movement, which was the dominant force leading up to and in the first several decades of the state of Israel. And everything was connected to the Histadrut, the Labor Trade Federation, everything that came out of it, your health fund, your bank, everything was part of Hapoel. So for example, Bank HaPoalim, the workers' bank, is that same bank, is from that same movement. Klalit, the largest Kupat Cholim in Israel, the largest healthcare fund, is part of that tradition. And on the other side, which was considered not necessarily more right-wing, but it was certainly considered more bourgeois and more capitalist, was Maccabi. Just like we talk about the Maccabim during Hanukkah, and they were considered the rivals of the Poalim, of the socialists, and they created their own system. So Maccabi, Kupat Cholim Maccabi, comes from the same movement, Maccabi Tel Aviv, and so forth. So we have these rivals within cities of youth movements, of sports teams, and it's in this context in the 1920s that this educator, Mechanech, we just learned that term, Aron Ze'ev, who's affiliated with the Poalim, is asked to write a song. And the song is, what he creates is Anu Nos'im Lapidim. It is very well known. You'll probably recognize it even if you don't know the lyrics. I'm going to play it and we're going to go through the lyrics really quick. There's another great resource for translated Hebrew words, but I just want you to listen to it because you get why this was so popular in the 20s and why you've probably heard this song before. Here it is. Okay, then it repeats itself. You've probably heard this song before in, excuse me, in a military context. This is a very popular song to play, even without the lyrics, as a military march. And you hear the sound of it. It sounds like a march. Mordechai Ze'ira was very important in creating that Israeli sound, both this type of sound and that very Jewish sounding, but also very self-sufficient, independent sound that a military march can have. Those of you, we've talked a lot about Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut in Cafe Oleh, the pinnacle ceremony that marks the start of Yom HaAtzmaut, the lighting of the torches, Tekes Hadlakat HaMesuot. This is one of the songs that plays a central role in the lighting of those actual torches in the name of the holiday. Excuse me, ceremony. Really quick. This song is related not just to Zionism and Israeli identity and why it's so fundamental to Hanukkah as well. Because what is it talking about? Anu nosim lapidim. We are carrying torches, right? Think of Hanukkah relighting the Hanukkiah and Beit HaMikdash, but also torches as a sign of revolt, right? You have your own light that you're carrying around. Balelot afelim, in the dark nights or the darkest of nights. Zochim ashvilim mitachat ragleinu. Those torches are zochim ashvilim mitachat ragleinu, are lighting up, illuminating the paths beneath our feet. Umi asher lev lo hatzameh laor. Umi asher lev lo hatzameh laor. And to whom has a heart, lev, hatzameh laor, which is thirsty for light. Yisa et einav velibo elenu laor veyavo. Yisa et einav will lift up his eyes. Whoever is thirsty for light will lift up his eyes to us and to the light and will join us, right? Think of this as a march song. This was written in the context of Hapoel versus Maccabi. You're joining Hapoel. You are joining the people on the side of light. You're joining the right people. And by joining us, you're going to be following the light and the people with the light behind them. And what's most important here is this next line, these next two lines, next two stanzas rather. Nes lo kara lanu, pach shemen lo matzanu. Nes lo kara lanu. A miracle didn't happen for us. Pach shemen lo matzanu. A container of oil we didn't find. This is that classic Zionist, not necessarily rebuke, but certainly criticism of traditional Jewish theology, which says, as opposed to the Hanukka story, the sort of the children's version of Hanukkah, right, about the miracle of the light. This is saying, as a children's song, there was no miracle. We didn't find that can of light. Instead, la'emek halachnu, hahara alinu. La'emek halachnu, into the valley we went. Hahara alinu, we ascended the mountain. Mayanot ha'orot hagnuzim gilinu. Within the springs of hidden light, we rediscovered the light. We found the light in these deep, dark, hidden places. So the light may have been there in the time of Hanukkah, but until we moved here as Zionist pioneers, it wasn't found until we discovered it by going into the Emek, by going up on the Hal, and going into the Mayanot Ha'orot Hagnuzim. In the Mayanot, excuse me. That's where we found the Ha'orot Hagnuzim, the hidden light, the buried light. And then it repeats again, Nes lo kara lanu, pach shemen lo matzanu. The miracle didn't happen for us. We didn't find the container of oil. Basela chatzavnu adam vehi or. Very powerful, very multi-messaged line here. Basela chatzavnu, in the rock, chatzavnu, we quarried, we cut into the rock, ad dam, until we struck blood. And only at that moment, vayehi or, and there was light, right? It's using biblical imagery to flip the script, using terms that any Jew with any modicum of education would know comes from the Torah, comes from our tradition, but to say, we're the ones who created the light. We're the ones, or at least who rediscovered the light. And therefore, anu nosim lapidim, we carry forth the torches. This is a really popular Zionist song that you hear, again, because of its military beat, is used in a lot of IDF ceremonies to this day, as well as state ceremonies. You may not hear it as often during Hanukkah. It's heard throughout the year, but it's a very important song in the larger Israeli society, Israeli identity creation. So hope that was a new one for all of you. Okay, I'm going to stop here. I talked a lot. Answer some questions in the Q&A. You say the shoresh of Hanukkah is the same as for education. Why is this? The thing about a lot of shorashim and their connection between words that isn't so evident is a lot of it is down to our creativity or the connections that we make ourselves. I can see one in being the holiday being about dedication and education, the idea of instilling something in each other or one another, I think is one way of thinking about the connection, but it's really up to your creativity. But they are indeed connected. How do I tell what size the candles are? The width is needed to fit my ceramic Hanukkiah. It's a great question. I would, you can always take your Hanukkiah to the store with you. The typical candles that you find, whether it's those multicolored wax ones or slightly fancy dipped wax ones, are very small. And they will fit the same size as a Chanukiat Pach. So for example, if you go to a grocery store and they sell a Chanukiat Pach or a regular size Chanukia, you can see that's usually the same size of the candles that they'll sell in those, classic blue cardboard boxes. The Chanukiat, but the Beit Chanukia or the Akvarium usually is medium or large size candles. How do you say French fries in Hebrew? Chips. This is one of many contributions that the British, through their occupation of the land, from the end of World War I through 1948, gave us, but we call them chips, as they're known in UK affiliated countries. Relationship between milui, as in filling, and miluim, reservists who fill in. Absolutely, they are absolutely connected. We all know someone at this point who is serving in, where's our word, milui? Many of us know someone who is serving in miluim. Miluim. These words are absolutely related, right? Reservists, right? The people who are filling in the ranks. Miluim are people who serve in reservists. We only use this term in a military context in Israel, but miluim, reservists, reserve soldiers. Miluim, but definitely related. Okay. I didn't get the difference between levivot and latkes. Okay, levivot are simply fritters. Okay, levivot is the catch-all term. Think of it in this way. You see these 4 rows here. Levivot is the category. Within levivot, you have different kinds, right? They're not just made with tapuchei adama in Israel, with potatoes. You have ones that are made with cheese. You have ones that are made with zucchini or other root vegetables or dairy products, like I said. Levivot are simply fritters, is some type of thin batter that's fried on a pan. That's all it means. It doesn't mean latkes. Latkes are specifically Eastern European style potato pancakes. Levivot is the larger category of foodstuffs here. A very important question here, folks. How many donuts is it customary to devour at a social gathering? That is a great question. I am of the belief that you bring in addition to other people, but as long as you bring, you have your own supply. Think about how much you want to eat, and therefore make sure that there's enough for everyone as well as yourself. My cardinal sin, however, for sufganiyot is you never, ever cut a sufganiya into half, let alone quarters or thirds or anything like that. This is a joyous holiday, and it's fried food. You eat as many as you want, but never, ever cut a sufganiya in half. Even if you want to know what's inside of it, just have the sufganiya. It's cold enough outside, you'll burn it off just trying to stay warm in cold weather in Israel, I promise. Someone is talking about the interpretation, and this is very much an interpretation, folks, of Hanukka. That Hanukka is an abbreviation for something else. That Hanukka abbreviates for they rested on Ka, the 25th of Kislev, right? That it's actually these 2 words. That is wonderful interpretation. I don't want to take away interpretation from anyone, folks. Okay, interpretation is an important part of Jewish identity, how we connect to it and how we keep making it fresh for ourselves and relevant. However, this is an interpretation. This is not the origin of the word as we know it, as meaning the root chet nun kaf, which is how modern Hebrew and the Hebrew language is created through 3-letter roots. Okay, so it's Hanukka. And even if it was, it has the root chet nun hey as the verb, from which we get the verb lachnot, to park, and chanaya, parking, migrash chanaya, chanyon, all those wonderful terms we have for those of you who unfortunately have to drive in this country. Okay, but in the meantime, Hanukka comes from the same root as chinuch, but it is a lovely interpretation to say that Chanu, meaning the Maccabim and the Jews, rested on Ka, Kaf Hey, the 25th of Kislev. Okay, but that is an interpretation. Okay, with that, we are just after the top of the hour. Toda rabah. Thank you all so much for joining. I will see you all next week. Until then, Hanukkah Sameach. I hope we can all find some light in these very dark times to connect with, whether it's the song, like I said, we make our own light, or we're joining others in finding light together and making light together. So Chag Hanukkah Sameach in advance, Besorot Tovot, may we only have good news moving ahead, and I will see you all here next week. Toda rabba and lehitraot, and you will get a recording of this class in the next day, hopefully well in time to get ready for Hanukkah this week. Take care.